This right here gonna be a cakewalk.
Even though Tekken 8 is looking like it's going to be very successful and break a lot of records, sell a lot of copies, make a lot of money, make a lot of new fans and old fans happy, there are still some fans who probably will never be happy because the game that they wanted instead was Tekken Tag Tournament 3. But the developers of Tekken is very hesitant to do that. And in this video, I want to explain why. Let's just start at the sales alone because this is a pretty obvious one. And as you can see here, Tekken 7 is at the top. And the game that came literally before that, Tekken Tag Tournament 2, is at the bottom. 1.5 million copies sold, the worst performing Tekken of all time. Tekken 8 already surpassed this with 2 million copies. This wide margin between sales is why the developers are continuing down the path that they are. A lot of players scratch their heads and wonder why Tekken 8 is so simplified, so easy, so for the casuals. But Tekken 7 branched off the path that Tag 2 was on, and Tekken 7 was so successful. So of course Tekken 8 is going to be mirroring what Tekken 7 was instead of Tekken Tag Tournament 3. Now, I have a string of 3 tweets. It starts off with someone praising the Pokken games. This person says Pokken was truly an underrated game. Harada responds to this and says, I don't think it's underrated because it's familiar to the fans. Someone responds and says, fingers crossed for Pokken Tag Tournament. Harada responds to this one and says the tag mechanism could be a bit of a maniac game. Now, this is the first time where Harada kind of like mentions the tag mechanic in kind of a negative light. A maniac is something that's just like wild, bro, uncontrollable, a savage. And when you look at what they said in their Tekken talk, they're kind of mirroring that same dialogue.
So just about tag, please hold off on that. As we mentioned way back when we did tag 2, try to have 4 characters on screen at the same time. Obviously, it really limits your resources, so the stage would have to be really pared down to something that's not that immersive. So that's not really realistic at this point at the moment. So please hold off on the tag comments for now.
A lot of people feel like the combos for Tekken 8 is already kind of like 3 in 1. And if you add the tag on top of that or into that, it is once again going to be even more of a maniac mechanism. Now, when we look at the book, we get more of an understanding why the developers feel this way. We saw the sales, we see their tweets, we see what they're saying now, but why, from their perspective, is the tag game so destructive? Before we take a dive into this, I do want to say at the start, a lot of people want Tekken Tag Tournament 3, but you have to realize how different it will be when it does arrive. For example, look at Tekken Tag Tournament 1 and Tekken Tag Tournament 2. Both of those games, yes, they're tag games, but they are drastically different from one another's. The time span between those games alone made the games radically different. And you would have to imagine everything that the developers learned in 7 and are going to experience in Tekken 8. When they do get around to a tag 3, just the time, just the difference, all of that experience alone will make that game something that we are not really familiar with. And I think this is what the tag players don't really understand, is that it's not going to be tag 2.0. It's going to be, you know, a different beast on its own, just based off time and technology alone. Like I said earlier, I'm going to be reading from the Art of Tekken, the Complete Visual History Deluxe Edition. This was originally published in 2019, and it does an excellent job of covering like everything Tekken. It says, it had been nearly a decade since the release of the first tag. It was a good time for a tag follow-up, but for the team, it was also time for a new challenge. One of the biggest challenges of Tag 1 was the expansive roster. This is something that players also love about Tag 2. 63 characters, I believe, on the roster at the end of the game's lifespan. Even in the Tag 3, I think the developers will not repeat that again. There's certain quotes from them in videos and articles where they say how big rosters is trouble.
We don't think that everyone will want 80 characters in a fighting game that they have to learn to fight against, etc. It's quite difficult.
I think they're saying that because what they experienced and learned in Tekken Tag Tournament 2. Here's a quote. It says, any characters fans were asking for, Harada put it in the game. He was like, I don't want to hear any complaints of so-and-so characters missing. It was the biggest roster we ever had.
We don't think that everyone will want 80 characters in a fighting game that they have to learn to fight against, etc. It's quite difficult.
This is something players really beg for, is characters, characters, characters. And with Tag 2, they literally gave the players everything. This, in my opinion, was mistake number one. Too many clones, too much combos, too much is what I want to highlight. Too much. Even with the head start provided by Tekken 6 character models, a roster of almost 60 was steep undertaking. You can choose, this is a quote, you can choose solo or tag mechanic and still theoretically have a good match even if there was 1 against 2, because parameters like health and damage were adjusted accordingly. There was a lot to account for. For Murray, it was worth the effort, but something happened after the release that Murray, Harada, and the rest of the team hadn't anticipated. The fan base increased quite a bit with Tekken 6. It was quite popular because the basic gameplay and a lot of the modes came out on console version were popular as well. So a lot of people at the end of Tekken 6 hadn't actually played Tekken Tag Tournament 1. This meant no matter how many characters were offered, the most Tekken 5 and Tekken 6 players were proficient with was only one of them. And for whatever reason, tag players felt solo mode wasn't viable. It was a tag game after all, but the attitude meant double the characters, which meant double the learning curve. The fans, it turned out, did not relish in learning the many intricate nuances of the game as much as the team enjoyed creating them. Here's a quote, this one's important. There's just so much to learn about the game. Because even if you have one character, there's still so much to learn about the game. Getting up off the ground, wall combos, move properties, sidestepping. There's just so much to learn about the base game, and there was just too much when we added the tag mechanic. There were just so many gameplay mechanics geared toward the hardcore Tekken fans, and that I think was off-putting to some of the newcomers of the series, and also people who didn't play Tag 1. Tekken Tag Tournament 2 can simply be explained as too much. All of these things combined made the game obnoxious. You talk about a tag system, you talk about 60 characters, you talk about very complicated movement and ways to get up off the ground. Like by themselves, all of these things are great. But Tag 2 made the horrible mistake of taking all of it and putting it together, and that is what ultimately, as they say here, it just turned a lot of people off. It was way too much. And this is why they say things like the tag mechanism can be a bit of a maniac. If we want to do a tag game in the future, we have to make the stages very basic and very simplistic. We have to dumb down a lot of things if we want 60 characters on the roster. You have to give and take, and Tag 2 didn't do any of that. Another quote here says, and because we spent so many resources on the main portion of the game, there weren't as many side modes as we had throughout the series comparatively. Side modes were a feature that console players, now a vast majority of Tekken audience, had come to expect, and one that kept them coming back to the game. This is why Tekken 8 led with some of those modes as well. The Tekken Lounge, Arcade Quest, Tekken Ball. They understand the error of their ways. But when the team looked towards the future of the franchise, they were forced to take a step back. Take a step back. What made the game popular for Tekken 3, for Tekken 5, or even Tekken 6? All of the elements and things we learned from Tekken Tag 2 kind of formed the basis of our decisions for Tekken 7. Even perhaps especially the things that didn't stick. They kind of did a similar thing with Tekken 4 as well, because if you look at Tekken 4, it's also very low on the sales chart. When both of these games performed horribly in comparison to the other Tekken games, they looked back at the other Tekken games and thought, okay, well, what made these games so special? They talked about all of these things that they felt was a problem, and in Tekken 7, what did they do? Simplified combos, simplified characters, simplified movement, and then boom, the game sells 11.8 million copies. That is a success that you do not turn back from. This is why the developers are very hesitant to make another tag game, and why they're solely focusing on one-on-one Tekken. How it started, and if the sales is anything to go by, how it will end.